Yeah.
Well said.
So I'll just text him, Brad here. So is it streaming now, Pablo?
Yes. We're live.
Well, welcome everybody. Can we close that door, Pablo? Thank you. If you're not here for Symone Johnson's thesis defense, you're in the wrong place. So, first of all, let me just start off. This is where I get a chance, just a couple minutes to do my best to embarrass Symone. So, it shouldn't be too hard. So, the one thing that strikes me about Symone is that, you know that saying, moss doesn't grow under somebody's feet? For the quiet, Symone is a fairly quiet individual. She's not very outspoken, not loud like her advisor. But Symone doesn't stand around a whole lot. And when you actually look at the breadth of her professional career, you will see that Symone has done a whole lot. I didn't realize all the things you've done until she sent me her CD this morning. And I was blown away. So Symone comes to us originally from Baltimore, which has this professional football team that Symone sometimes follows, and we go back and forth on that. She did her undergraduate work at Hampton University with Andre Horodisky, who is a very good friend of mine. And when I was trying to recruit a student, Andre reached out to me and said, "I've got just the lady for you." And Symone came on to work with myself, Brad Weatherby, and some others at the time that we were doing a lot of sand tiger work. And so Symone came on. I'll never forget the first time we put her on a boat, which is a lot of what I have done. And Symone, I put her behind the wheel of a boat, and Symone, she was very nervous, and she took to it though. And from my perspective, it was just awesome seeing this young lady grow. Symone and I have gotten to know each other over the years, and I'm very, very proud of where she's come. After she finished here, so after she finished her coursework here, Symone was also at the same time becoming a resident. She was a resident advisor here. So again, she's taking on all these other responsibilities. And as she was finishing up her coursework and her funding here, an opportunity arose, and Symone applied for a Canals Fellowship with the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration. And to the best of my knowledge, Symone was the first DSU student to actually get a Canals Fellowship from the state of Delaware to go. And while she was there, you know, she worked in the Office of Education and with Christos, who is here today, which I think says a lot when these folks come. She also has done a lot of work with Carol Brewster-Geist, who's on her committee. And again, 3 of her committee members, Chris Heckscher, Brad Weatherby, and Carol are off-site today. So Symone, after she finished her Canals Fellowship, did a little bit of substitute teaching just for a couple of months. Again, there's no moss growing under her feet. And now she is gainfully employed at the National Aquarium in Baltimore, and she's an urban recreation coordinator for their conservation education department. So Symone is doing a lot of educational work, which I think is really suits her very well. So I hope over the next 45 minutes that Symone is going to provide some education on one of Delaware's most charismatic species and a group of fishes that are near and dear to my heart. So Symone, it's all yours.
Thanks.
We need to turn the lights on. Did we decide that?
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming to my defense. I really appreciate everyone being here. So is that good? Okay. So we're going to get started. My defense is titled "An Examination of Recreational Angling for Sharks in Delaware's Waters." That's here with the sand tiger. So recreational angling is often overshadowed by the commercial fishery, but there is a need to give recreational angling some more attention for 2 reasons. Number one is that responsible anglers may represent an overlooked group of conservation supporters through their actions. They might know the species very well that they're targeting, and thus they may be folks who are practicing actions that are promoting conservation of those species. But number 2, recreational anglers may contribute to the injury or mortality of species. So for example, There are vast tournaments that occur where people go out, anglers go out and fish for thousands of bass for a short period of time. So lots of people are going out, going hard and fishing for them. And that could maybe cause some or pose some injury to those fish because they're exposed to a capture for a really short period of time, or a lot of capture for a short period of time and left in tanks before they're released back into the water. And when they're released, they may be put back in places where they weren't originally found, so they can change the distribution of those fish species. So that's just one way that recreational angling may be contributing to injury or to the dislocation of certain species. So now we're also going to look, you see that I have a nice picture here of a headline that says, Miss Maine USA contestant, a prolific shark tagger, but is this conservation? So NOAA has a program called the Apex Predator Program, where they provide tags to recreational anglers. And they do this so that anglers will start to collect some information for them, such as like species location, where they might find certain species. And it's already tied to what they normally do. They're already out there fishing for sharks sometimes, or whatever their target species is. So it's like another thing that they can add to their list when they're fishing. But sometimes folks might be seen sitting on top of sharks when they're on the beach. And this particular young lady was seen doing that. In this article, there's a picture of it, of her just sitting on top of the shark, but saying like, I'm doing this to save the shark. You can see like her headline, it says, everyone loves cute seals, I want to save sharks. And this is how I'm saving the sharks because I have these tags from NOAA, so I'm doing the right thing. But is that really conservation? Does that really mean that you're protecting them if you are not handling them in the best way? So we're going to get into some conversations about recreational anglers and their perceptions of shark conservation and how they handle them, and if those things contribute to the injury or mortality of sharks. So sharks are these, just like Dwayne said, really great group of fishes. I think that they are really magnificent. I think that they're magnificent old creatures. And they are apex predators, so they hunt. Everyone knows like sharks, they're really strong. They've lasted for a really long time period on Earth. They were here before dinosaurs, and they were able to exist all that time. I think that's something that we should really, I think that speaks to the testament of the species or the class of sharks. But they're especially susceptible to additional sources of mortality or injury because they have slow growth and late maturity, which means that it takes a long time for them to reproduce. And when they do reproduce, they don't give birth to that many pups, which means that it's hard for them to continue their species, right? And these life history traits are also are conflicted, or they can be exacerbated when the commercial fishery comes into play, because people are fishing for sharks. And I know you guys maybe have heard of shark fin soup. That's what most people come up with when they want to talk about threats for sharks. So sharks are fished in the commercial fishery, sometimes for their meat, but in other countries usually for shark fin soup. It's like this delicacy in some Asian countries, and they sell a bowl of shark fin soup for a hefty price, I might say. And so that's another additional source of mortality to shark species. And then even more so, sharks are also caught and catch and release in the recreational fishery. So people like to go out for fun and catch sharks, like the young lady that we mentioned before. So Delaware is home to many species of shark, but I want to highlight these three species in particular right now because their relevance to Delaware Bay and to this study. So Delaware Bay is essential fish habitat for the dusky neonates. And neonates means like the young of the sharks, just so that for people who don't have a background in fisheries. The stock is overfished and has been prohibited since 2000, and rebuilding is expected by 2107. Delaware Bay also serves as a nursery for sandbars, and it supported the commercial and recreational fishery until the sharks were prohibited in 2008. So that means that recreationally and commercially, people shouldn't be taking these sharks, like landing these sharks, bringing them up, and keeping them. They should be kept in the water. And rebuilding for that species is expected between 2047 and 2360, depending on the nature of the stock. So that alone, without me even going further, that just lets you know how hard it is for sharks to rebound after they've been faced with additional sources of mortality, in addition to their already existing life history traits. Since sand tigers, they show very high levels of cyclidelity to the bay, so they come back to Delaware Bay every year. The same sharks are returning back here to the bay, making it one of the largest summer foraging areas in the Northwest Atlantic. And in Delaware Bay, they're subject to a lot of scientific surveys. They are a species that most folks, they want to get some more knowledge and background on sand tigers. And they are collected for the aquarium trade. A lot of people have probably seen them. When I show you a picture, you've probably seen it in the aquarium because they look kind of scary, but they're not. But people like that when they go to see sharks. So, as mentioned, Delaware is home to many species of shark. But right now, I just want to highlight the sand tigers a little bit more. As Dwayne mentioned, I came on when they were doing work on sand tigers, and this is what I was thrown into, and it's really interesting. It was different. So sand tigers likely gained their popularity among anglers, again, due to their like menacing appearance. They have these teeth that kind of protrude out of their mouths. They look scary, and they're also easy to capture. So people like a fish, a shark that looks scary, but it's also easy to handle because I don't really have to do that much. I don't have to really fight with this animal, but it looks like I caught a monster, right? So there was the use of kayaks to deploy bait, and I'll show you what that looks like in a second, but basically folks are fishing off of a beach and they drop bait into their kayak and paddle out from the shore and then drop their bait into the ocean and come back and try to reel in a shark from the shore. Yeah, so it's I never even knew people did something like that. I think it's crazy, but they do. And in 2010, charter operations began where folks began actively targeting this species and shark-based tournaments were held. So increased recreational angling pressure has been resulted in physical damage and mortality for sharks. So you can see in this photo here that at the bottom photo that there's a shark that is dead that was washed up on the beach. And also on the top one, you can see folks that are fishing from the shore to get sharks. So I mean, that's normally what it looks like. They're dragging the shark up onto the sand. And then it looks like they're probably trying to get them back out into the water now. I don't know, it doesn't look like, do you think the shark feels good being on the beach? I don't think so. So sand tigers possess this feeding mechanism called gulp feeding, where they swallow prey whole. And in terms of angling, that increases the chances of damage to their internal organs. So I just wanted to show in this picture that this is a dead sand tiger, and it was washed up onto the beach. Dwayne found it actually. It was washed up onto the beach, and it seems that its cause of death was due to a circle hook being lodged internally, which caused massive bleeding. Yeah, that's a good, I'm happy you said that. I let you know that you can see that it's a problem, right? So in the Argentine fishery, they observed the feeding habits of sand tigers, and they noted that sand tigers are swallowing the hook. When they swallow the hook, they are in turn hooked internally, so they get hooked inside. And that can be in their stomach, the esophagus. In Massachusetts, internal hooking occurred 42% of the time, regardless of circle hook use. Most fishermen are using circle hooks or J hooks, and it's been noted by NOAA that for best practices for sharks, folks should use circle hooks, because the thought is that it's easier for to release a shark and there's less harm done to a shark if they are using circle hooks. But again, you see, regardless of hook type, even though they use circle hooks, 42% of the time they were hooked internally. And during a shore-based angler survey here in Delaware, internal hooking still occurred, regardless of hook type. And hook removal, though, was significantly related to hooking location. So hooking location in that instance was referring to being hooked in the jaw or being hooked internally, a deep hooking. So given all of the effects of angling on sharks, and such as sand tigers and others, NOAA and the state of Delaware management has put in some measures to try to protect these sharks when they are encountered during angling. So Delaware implemented a regulation that requires prohibited sharks to be released in the water in hopes that folks won't want to catch sharks if it's harder for them to release it in the water. And also in Ocean City, just recently, an emergency ordinance banned chumming and blood baiting from the beach within 600 feet of the beach in Ocean City. You can see here, like, this is what I was saying about people kayaking their bait out. So this young man, I don't know who he is, but he has his kayak, he has his bait, he puts that bait into his kayak and goes out into the water. He kayaks back, and then he uses his fishing rod to reel in a shark that he brings onto the beach. So that's kind of what it looks like as a step-by-step. So knowing the nature of the recreational angling scene in Delaware and that many prohibited species are captured during angling, I wanted to better understand those interactions between anglers and sharks, and especially prohibited shark species. So that brings me to chapter 1, understanding recreational angler perspectives in Delaware shark fishery. So there is a need to include angler perspective in management. Again, I talked about how anglers could be supporters of conservation through their actions, but they also may be contributing negatively. Although there is no direct fishery for those species that I mentioned in the beginning, the dusky, the sandbar, and sand tiger, because they are prohibited now, they are still captured during angling. People are still out there fishing, and I mentioned that all of those species occur in Delaware. So they're captured still no matter what, even if people may not be targeting them intentionally. Angler behavior can impact the conservation of exploited species, so human dimensions should be included in management. Surveys are a really good way and common way that state and federal agencies have used to determine angler perceptions and to gauge a better idea of what folks are catching and what they feel about the fishery. So given that, I decided to do an angler survey. And the goal of the survey was to improve an understanding, of the possible threats to sharks and pose potential solutions to those threats or risks that sharks are facing, and then offer some insight into angler willingness to follow those solutions or managements that are put in place. So my target audience were individuals who held a finfish license, a recreational finfish license from March to September through the state of Delaware. To create this survey, I reviewed some research on sand tigers. That's why I kind of gave you that background in the beginning, because there was a lot of research that was done in this lab and others that showed that sand tigers are being harmed through recreational angling, and just pulling in information about their life history traits let us know that any additional sources of injury or mortality would have a lasting effect on them. So I used that in previous state and national angler surveys to get an idea of how people are setting up their own survey, their own surveys, how they format questions. And then I also received advisement from the state of Delaware, that's DNREC, and NOAA social scientists and managers on questions that they wanted to be asked of the anglers in Delaware. I received approval from my committee, and I was actually exempted from the IRB, so I didn't need to worry about getting approval from them. And I ended up with the Gauging Angler Perceptions of Shark Fishing in Delaware survey. So the survey was comprised of 22 questions, and again, these questions were determined based on state and federal interests regarding anglers in Delaware with sharks. Then there's, you can see there's a couple of different groupings that we have here. So respondent demographics, there are 3 questions, 4 questions about fishing preferences, and then 5 questions on the angler-shark interactions, conservation knowledge, and management strategies. And I'm gonna go into each of those in 1 second. To administer the survey, it was sent out through GenRec to the state of Delaware to 1,500 anglers, but we also wanted to do something called snowball sampling or chain referral, and that's when a group of when you get a group of a targeted community to pass along the survey to their friends who are also within that same community. And this was done through DelawareSurfFishing.com and saltfishbulletin.net. They're pictured there. And even after we did that, we got a lot more respondents, but we still wanted a little bit more. So DenRec sent out another 1,500 emails to anglers with the survey attached. And it was closed on December 19th. Okay, so for my analysis, you'll see that a lot of the analysis, especially for the fishing preferences and those types of demographics, they're pretty straightforward, just looking at averages. But for another portion of it, I employ something called a binomial logit test, and it's to model what factors influence the belief that current management measures and restrictions conserve sharks. The factors that we thought may contribute to this are state of residency, age, avidity, which I'm going to define as years of fishing or your fishing experience, confidence in shark identification, comfort with handling sharks, agreement that anglers pose risk to sharks, and agreement that prohibited sharks need protection. So again, all of these factors, we wanted to see if any of those influence the belief that management that is in place right now will conserve sharks. Okay, so let's get to some results. So 226 people completed the survey, and their ages range from 17 to 81. Their avidity or years fishing experience ranged from 2 years to 78 years. I'm guessing that's maybe the 81-year-old. I hope so. And they were residents of 7 states. So 55% of the respondents were from Delaware. But you can see that we also have folks represented from Maryland, Pennsylvania, Virginia, New Jersey, New Hampshire, New York, and Washington, D.C. So when asked, when do you normally fish? 70% of people said that they fish in the morning, 54% said they fish as time permits, and 53% said in the afternoon. And then only about 47% fish at night. Oh no, it's way less than 47. Yeah, that's right, 47% fish at night. So not as many folks are fishing at night as they are in the morning or as time permits. I would assume that people are probably fishing as time permits whenever they get the chance to get out there. People were also asked to specify how many hours they spend annually on each mode of fishing, just so I can get an idea if they're fishing on a boat or off the shore. So we had an average of 12 hours from charter boat, 86 hours from private boat, and that means that they have their own boat, so they're going out on their own time to go fishing, and then 118 hours from the shore. So it seems that most people are probably fishing from the shore. When asked for their target species, 87% said that they're targeting striped bass, and 85%, which is really close to the striped bass, are targeting summer flounder, and 77% are targeting bluefish. And then I also went into their motivation. So like, are they fishing for fun or are they fishing for competition? So we had that folks are spending 72 hours on catch and consume, 131 hours annually on catch and release, and 9 hours in competition. So it doesn't look like that many people are competing in competition, but there's a lot of catch and release going on. So the respondents were provided with this statement that says, on a scale of 1, strongly agree, to 4, strongly disagree, to 4, strongly agree, rate the following items. So I'm just going to go through by percentage for each of these statements. 73% are confident that if they catch a shark, they will be able to identify it. 81% are comfortable with handling sharks. 70% believe that anglers do present some harm to sharks when fishing. So I kind of did the reverse when I reported that, since it's a negative in this version. And then 84% believe that prohibited sharks do need to be protected. So, I mean, it seems like they think that there needs to be some protection, and they think that anglers maybe pose some of the threats and risks to them. So they can identify with themselves they might be contributing to it. So we also asked, what sharks do you commonly catch, right? And most of them, 46%, are catching dusky smoothhounds, also known as smooth dogfish, if you might have heard of that. There's also a beer, that's from Delaware, dogfish. And then also 45% are catching sandbars, 40% are doing spiny dogfish, 27% sand tigers, and 16% duskies. I'm going to highlight a few of these because they're going to come up later in my results about interacting with prohibited species and about issues with identification. So we have the bull shark is what I want to highlight, the I don't know answer option, and dusky, sand tiger, and sandbar. So we also asked them to identify actions that they take when shark fishing, and they were allowed to choose more than one action that they take. So choose all that apply. I'm gonna say some positive actions that they said they're doing, were that 54% are leaving the shark in the water upon release, 50% are removing the terminal tackle, so they're like taking the hook out of the shark's mouth. 28% try to avoid sharks, so I guess they want no parts with sharks. They don't want to be involved for whatever reason. And this next statement is 47% are using circle hooks, and that can maybe go either way. It can be positive depending on what species you might be looking at, but it also can be negative in the case of sand tigers. But we had 23% saying that they leave the hook in place, and 8% saying that they're using J hooks. This last box here on the corner says conservation engineering. It says use of blocker rigs. 3% said that they are doing that. I'm going to explain what a blocker rig is for you, and we're going to talk about it a little bit later too. But it's a length of PVC that's perpendicular to the leader, and it prevents the hook from swallowing prevents the shark from swallowing the hook and the big hole when they get caught on it. So this was not a specific question in the survey, but I was able to extrapolate this data based on the other answers that they provided. So these are prohibited sharks that the people say in my survey say that they're catching with the exclusion of the white shark. We had a predetermined list, and out of that list, sandbar, sand tiger, dusky, and white shark were the prohibited species, and only one person said that they caught a white shark, so we didn't include that one. But I just wanted to show that regardless of what fishing mode they were using, people are catching more sandbars than sand tigers or duskies. And when fishing for these species, 94% are removing hook and gear from sharks that are released. I mean, that's pretty good. 82% are using circle hooks, and 76% keep the shark in the water upon release. And that is a requirement in Delaware for prohibited sharks, that they must be in the shark upon release. I mean, in the water upon release. So not everyone is doing that. So we want to see if we can maybe get to why that might be happening. When asked to identify which of the following may influence the conservation of prohibited species, they were allowed to, again, choose all that apply. And I'm just going to go over like the top 4 that they said. So handling practices, 81% said that, 73% said commercial fishers, angler experience was attributed to 65% of the respondents, and hook type was 62%. And I just again want to reiterate that hook type may not be the determining factor in the conservation of those prohibited sharks. But they do, in this case, it's interesting, they don't give themselves as high of a ranking as they do for commercial fishers. So they're saying that the commercial guys have more of an effect than they do. Probably because they don't want to put it all on them. Okay. So we got into some questions about management. Due to how the question was worded, there were a few folks that didn't understand if ranking should be, if number 1 should be they're most willing to adopt that ranking option, or if number 7 should be they're most willing to adopt it. So these results that I'm about to report, at least for the ranking, should be taken with caution, because 2 respondents did actually write to me in the comments box saying that they weren't sure which way to go. So seasonal restriction was most frequently chosen as the number 1 option that they're willing to adopt. But anglers were least likely to want a restriction on the means of bait deployment, like the kayaking. They don't want that to happen. And then they were also asked, should there be more or fewer regulations in Delaware? And you can see that just the slight majority are uncertain. They don't know. They can't decide. While it's pretty close between more and fewer. And this is something that you're going to see again. So it seems that anglers, they aren't sure if they should be more regulations or if we should just have less. They don't know what they want. Will current management measures conserve sharks? Again, 1/3 believe current management measures will conserve sharks, but 54% again were uncertain. They don't know. So this is the question that we did the binomial logic test on, to determine if any factors influence the belief that management will conserve sharks. And we were unable through that test to identify any of those factors being influential in that belief. So there could be due to the fact that there's a lot of variability, with more than half of the respondents being unsure about current management measures. And so that leads me to think that maybe more regulations might not be the answer. So let's get into there's one more thing. I asked them for suggestions on management, if they had anything that they think management should be doing to protect sharks. Less than half of the respondents offered an input, 41% did, but the ones who did said that there should be more education and training for anglers. There should be changes in current regulations or new regulations. And then only 9% said there should be increased enforcement and penalties, and that they should address commercial fishing. So that goes back to that relationship between recreational anglers and commercial fishermen. I want to highlight some of these quotes from those anglers who did write in, because it speaks to their need for more training, or their feeling that they are unsure about how to identify species. So we have that they will allow us to bring the shark further out of the surf to be able to get the hook out of their mouth safer and with less harm to the angler and shark. So maybe this comment may be tied to why not everyone is following that rule of leaving the shark in the water upon release for the prohibited sharks. Someone says, I think education should be, education and proper techniques and awareness needs to be put in place more than restrictions. So maybe that's that uncertain option that people were saying, and that, or no. Stronger penalties for keeping undersized or prohibited sharks. I'm talking financially crippling fines. Like they want it to happen. I didn't have this one up here, but someone else said, like, Delaware, I think rules are fine. Everyone else should fall in line. If you can't do it, then you shouldn't fish. This is someone else said. And I mean, I think that's a fair point too. There should be better policing on the surf fishing side. Seeing too many get manhandled, I'm assuming sharks, and likely to die. And then many look similar, and knowing what I could harvest versus what I could not would be helpful. So that gets back to that education and identification issue that we talked about. So we see that 54% are following Delaware's regulations, but maybe due to the comments that we saw, not all of them were doing it because it may be difficult to remove the hook while the shark is in the water. 47% of folks are using circle hooks compared to J hooks, and that is suggested by NOAA, the National Marine Fisheries Service, as an action that folks can take to maximize survival for sharks as the best practice. But again, sand tigers are internally hooked on both circle and J hooks, so using circle hooks doesn't help them. But I want to, again, remind you that 3% of my respondents said that they're using blockers, which prevent deep hooking. So we have a small group of people who are taking an extra step of caution and caring more about the species. And this is just what a blocker really looks like. So it seems that anglers want to promote shark survival, but they're failing to comply with Delaware regulations and or NIMS recommendations. Best practices do show promise, but maybe they need to be better disseminated. So NIMS has put out a catch and release best practices guide and an educational video that is called Atlantic Recreational Shark Fishing, Handling and Release of Prohibited Species. So this is maybe one of the trainings or education options that are now available for folks who want some of that. But there are also some new ideas. I like this because I like education. Using children as agents of change. Kids make a big difference. They can speak to their parents, speak to other children. And it was found during a workshop for kids aged between 8 and 10 years old that in workshops where there's visuals and they are walked through proper handling, the fish that those children caught were handled less. They had more time, they spent more time working with the fish, but it was only because they were being more careful and there was less air exposure when those individuals were working with fish as compared to others who were not in those workshops. So it might be a good idea for the state maybe to hold some fishing workshops with kids and adults, but also they should conduct follow-up monitoring programs to make sure that those behaviors are not just a one-off, but they're sustained and maybe there's some behavior change and promoting the recovery of species. So let's talk about identification. So 70% believe that they are knowledgeable about identifying sharks, but they might not be because sometimes it's hard to distinguish between different species. 6% said they're catching bull sharks, 16% said they're catching duskies, and 45% say they're catching sandbar sharks. These are two of those shark species. Do they look similar? You think so? Very. Yeah, so I'm trying to point, but the one that says photo credit NOAA, that is from the dusky shark, and the one here on the left with the photo credit NIMS is a sandbar shark. But biologists and fishermen alike can easily get these two species confused. So it speaks to, if it's difficult to distinguish species, it's probably hard for you to follow the regulations that are in place for those species, especially if some of the sharks are permissible, like allowed for you to keep or to fish, like maybe a bull shark as compared to a dusky or a sandbar shark. They're not allowed for you to keep. Again, those are prohibited. So 16% of my respondents correctly identified the prohibited species in Delaware that I provided a predetermined list. So only 16% were able to do that correctly. I think that speaks a lot to, in conjunction with their maybe lack of confidence in identifying species, maybe that's why they're not following the rules. Maybe they don't know if they're catching a prohibited species or not. So to overcome misidentification, Delaware has a commonly misidentified shark sky. NOAA has put out some identification placards, but you can also raise awareness and exposure to proper identification through a few routes. Again, K through 12 school curriculum is a really good way to get kids able to understand and identify different species. Through adult and children community education, as you can see me here at a festival when I was here in Delaware, working with folks, talking to them about sand tigers, where we find them and the threats that they're facing. And then also at aquariums, and I'm working at an aquarium, and we have sand tigers there. And it's really good because it's been noted that in aquariums, when people feel a connection to an animal or species, they are more likely to care about its conservation. So they might be another good avenue to promote conservation and proper identification. So anglers are unsure if there should be more or fewer regulations to conserve prohibited sharks. And this is an issue of compliance. So motivations for compliance cannot be examined or intervened with just one approach. There's many ways that we can kind of attack this problem head on. A lot of the anglers mentioned that social media played a huge part in the actions of the folks who are fishing, like dragging sharks up onto the beach, sitting on top of them. Those are all actions that were seen on social media, and NOAA does not agree at all. They advise that folks are not allowed to do this, but you can see the media does sometimes have an influence, a negative influence on the perceptions of sharks. Like in Shark Week, sometimes they don't always show them in the best light. There's a lot of attacks. Even this is just an article I found, but they're calling them these freaks. Like, really? It's a cookie cutter. And I don't think that they are freaks. They're pretty cool. But that's just how they label. That's how they label sharks sometimes, and they can sometimes put them in a discouraging light. But media can also be used to promote conservation. There's a lot of movies and documentaries out, and in one study it was found that after folks watched the documentaries surrounding the conservation of sharks, they were more interested in caring about them and more willing to learn more about how to protect them. Increased enforcement is also an option, but it doesn't offer drivers of behavior, and it's important to learn why people are doing what they're doing so that we can combat or try to help them to comply more with the regulations. And to address drivers of behavior, you might want to do correct questioning, but again, that has its downfalls too, because people might lie. They might underreport, or there's something called social desirability where they don't want to seem like they're the bad guy, so they're not going to say what they're actually doing because they don't want to be frowned upon. So this is just to show you that there's no one answer. There's not one way that this can go. It can go lots of ways, and I think it should cover different approaches based on whatever situation your state or your species is in. So some implications from the English survey. Delaware brings in millions of dollars from recreational fisheries. It's people come here every year to go to the beach and fish, and you can see that it's people we're coming from all over different states. So it's a really popular thing for them to do. So it supports the economy here. Anglers need more education on shark species identification and handling techniques. Only about half of the anglers that we surveyed are using the suggested protocols or regulations when capturing prohibited species. And misidentification, improper handling, and non-compliance can be resolved with a suite of approaches, including K-12 education, increased training, social media campaigns or movies, and increased enforcement. So moving on to chapter 2, we wanted to look at the influence of modified ganyons on hooking location of prohibited species. And I'll tell you what that means in a So there are lots of studies that have been done to explore minimizing the incidental capture or associated mortality or injury of species that are caught but are not targeted. So, for example, turtle exclusion devices. You can see there's a photo or diagram there at the bottom. This allows shrimp and turtles to like come into a net, but there's space for the turtle to leave, but not for the shrimp. So the turtle, or if a shark goes into there or a bigger fish goes in, they won't be trapped in this net because they have an escape route. So this is to make sure that we're not accidentally catching things that we don't intend to or causing any additional harm to those species. There also was another study where electropositive metals were used to deter sharks from bait. This is a way that they were trying to reduce bycatch because sharks can sense electromagnetic fields. They were hoping that as a shark approaches, they won't want to stay there, they'll swim away. And it did look promising on long lines, but needs to be further developed before it's something that's put in place. So Captain Mark Sampson developed the blocker that I spoke about earlier in 2008. He's a fisherman who has a boat, and folks are allowed to, if they pay, to come out in his boat and fish for sharks out of Ocean City. He noted a 5 to 10% incidence of gut hooking when he was doing these fishing adventures, and almost 100% success rate at preventing gut hooking when using a blocker. So it was determined also that sharks do not avoid bait attached to this blocker rig. So that's a really important thing to know for people who are targeting sharks. If you want to catch them, you don't want to use gear that they're not going to want to go to, right? You want to use gear that's still going to promote conservation, but you still can catch your target species. So we wanted to learn more about sharks. Again, Joanne and folks before I even came here were working on sharks, and they wanted to learn more, sand tigers in particular. They wanted to learn more about these animals, but they didn't want to add to the problem. So we talked about how sand tigers are especially susceptible to additional sources of mortality. So the question is, can these blockers be successful for targeting sharks on a long line? Captain Mark is using it with a regular fishing rod, and now we want to see if it's successful on the long line. I mentioned that these sand tigers are targeted in scientific surveys and aquarium trade, so it may be useful in that way. So the objective was to explore gear modifications that result in minimizing harm to shark species caught during angling. My methods, we sampled the middle to lower Delaware Bay. I'm not going to go through like every single one of these bullets, but we baited the line with menhaden, and a long line is basically, in simplest terms, it's like a rope that has marks that are set out. There's about 24 hooks that are on each of those marks, 24 hooks on that long line that we put into the water, and that these hooks are attached to it. Every other has a blocker or a control. So you'll see in the next one, we use blocker ganyons and we use control ganyons. Control do not have that blocker gear on them. We recorded the species identification, so what species was it, sex, length, gear type, hook location being jaw or gut, and post-release condition. To analyze the data, we used a binomial regression to examine the impact of gear, blocker, or control on hooking location. And again, hooking location, jaw was one option and gut was the other. Pearson's chi-squared test was also used to examine the relationship between ganglion type and hook location, condition at release, and sex for sandbars and sand tigers. And this last bullet point is just that if there weren't enough data points, the test was repeated with replicates. So in initial results, we conducted this comparative study in 2012 and 2013, July through September in 2012. The blockers were placed, blockers or control were placed randomly on the line. In 2013, it was conducted July through August in an alternating pattern, so one after the other, blocker control, and that was done for 40 sets. And then in 2014, they only used blocker gangans, and so there's no comparative study done in that year. So just to give you an idea of what we were catching: skate, cow-nosed ray, sandbar shark, sand tiger, and a dusky smoothhound. Again, that's the smooth jaw fish. You can see the numbers there, but we can go into it in a second. So for the purposes of the rest of it, we're going to talk about the impacts of the gear on the prohibited sharks that were caught, and that's the sand tiger and the sandbar. So males dominated the catch in both years for sand tigers. They were collected in 2012. Males were collected over twice as commonly on the, oh, we're not even there yet. So I just want to say that males dominated the catch here, and females dominated for 2012 and 2013 with sandbar. So this is the opposite. There were, in the sandbars, only 2 neonates were there, and way more females, obviously, and all of the larger sharks were female. So impacts of gear on species composition. So there's a difference in the sex of sharks that are caught on gear. In 2012, gear type did influence catch by sex for sand tigers. You can see that 2012 on the control, there's 106 males caught, while there's 51 caught on blockers. So there's a lot more males caught on the control. But in 2013, there was no difference. And there was no difference in either year for captured sandbars, when it comes to sex being influenced by the gear type. So impact of gear on captured shark condition at release. There was no impact for sand tigers or sandbars for their condition at release when considering the gear type that they were caught on. But that doesn't mean that there were no effects. That doesn't mean that sharks caught on blockers or controls weren't in better condition than the other, because condition is subject to interpretation. There's no clear definition on what's excellent, what's good, and what's average, or what's poor. Also, sublethal effects may not be visible. You maybe can't see the effects when they first leave. When you first let them go, they may swim away. There's also sometimes a misconception that if it swims away, it's okay, and that may not always be true. So impact of gear on hooking location. This is probably the most exciting part of it. No sandbars were hooked in the gut because 100% were hooked in the jaw, so there was no need to look at the relationship between hooking location and gear type, because all of them were hooked in the jaw no matter what gear type they were on. But sand tigers, on the other hand, hooking location was significantly affected by gear type. 94.8%, 95% of gut hooking was on control gangans. And that's like they're trying to get the hook out of a sand tiger there. This is not on my long line, but this is just showing you what it looks like. Blocker gangans were successful at hooking sand tigers in the jaw, 97.9% instead of the gut, 1.4%, minimizing harm to the animal. So that's a really big difference, right? Like you can obviously see that blockers, they do a pretty good job of their job of preventing gut hooking for sand tigers, at least. So the blocker study showed that catch rate of sand tigers was higher on control gangans than blocker gangans, but that doesn't mean that blocker gangans aren't successful at catching sand tigers. Again, we still caught a lot of sharks even on the blocker gangans. They are successful at hooking sand tigers in the jaw instead of the gut, as compared to control gangans. And so, remembering that Delaware Bay is a place where sand tigers are coming every year, that they are used, or that they're the focus for a lot of scientific surveys, and that they're collected, they may be collected here or in other locations for aquariums, we recommend the use of blocker gangans in areas of high sand tiger concentration for those types of events. even scientists should be using using techniques to minimize harm to species, especially species that are at risk of additional injury or sources of mortality. So it doesn't hurt for scientists to do to practice the same technique. But we need further research to determine how or if blocker leaders can be used in the recreational angling from shore in particular. We did talk about how Captain Mark used it on his boat, but we have no idea, or we haven't done at least, any research to see if they can be used off the shore. So last few things to remember is that from the Angler Survey, there needs to be increased angler education and training surrounding best practices in species identification. Anglers are not adhering to regulations and suggestions, and it needs to be even further examined to explain why. I offered some potentials, but there should still be more observations to determine what is going on there. Future surveys should be sent annually after fishing season. It's normal to send a survey once a year, but this frequency should take into account Delaware's other surveys, because we do not want the anglers to get tired of surveys that they maybe won't respond in. They won't be as effective. And for the modified fishing gear, we see that it's successful at preventing gut hooking in sand tigers. We recommend the use for collecting sharks for the aquarium and for scientific surveys. And we need further research and development before implementing or suggesting that it be used in recreational angling. And then I have a note here that NOAA has a program called the Bycatch Reduction Engineering Program, and they look for ways that they can reduce bycatch in different species, or ways that reduce injury or mortality. So this maybe could be a way to get funding to do further examination for recreational angling. So I just wanted to say thank you to the Proactive Species Conservation Program for funding the work, and to my advisor, Dwayne Fox, and my committee members, Dr. B, Carol, Kit, and Brad, and to Ed. He's not here, but he helped a lot with the analysis and really gave us a lot of assistance to do the analysis. Scott Newland and Stu, they sent out the survey through the state of Delaware. Those are the folks I worked with to develop it. Rich King and Jay, they're the people who let me put it on their fishing forum. Lori, she helped to compile the data and give me everything. And Drs. Halsey and Matt Brees, they did a lot of the research on the boat. And then NOAA Office of Education for giving me their SurveyMonkey account to do the survey, because I did it on their account. And also for just giving me time to work on it during my fellowship. And my friend Shadesha, she lets me run all of my analysis on her computer because I don't have it on mine. So I want to thank her too. And so